All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We are in the process of waiting for the room to populate and waiting for folks to show up. It looks like we have a good crowd joining us today. We are very excited to be adding this webinar to our digital offerings this year. It's definitely been an interesting year when it comes to outreach, and I know Will is excited to be sharing some of the innovations and progress that we're making with a lot of the changes we've been working on. And I think we're going to go ahead and we're going to get this party started. Are you ready, Will?
Absolutely.
All right. Welcome to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation webinar, Moving Forward, the Blueprint and Your Impact. My name is Alice Christman, and I am the Senior Manager of Community Engagement and Marketing at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Now, just to get a little bit of housework out of the way before we get started, we are taking questions during the program, but we will address them at the end of the program. You can ask those questions in the Q&A or the chat function, and we'll get to Will when he is finished with his remarks. Our speaker today is Will Baker. He joined the Chesapeake Bay Foundation in 1976 as an intern and has been leading our efforts to restore and protect the Chesapeake Bay ever since. And boy, did 2020 give us some challenges or what? And we met these challenges as we have been meeting them for over 50 years, and we see them as opportunities. And with that being said, I'm going to give the microphone to Will Baker, your speaker today. Thank you, Will.
Thanks very much, Alice, and welcome everyone. I hope you all are well, surviving the challenges of 2020. We're doing fine. I don't think we've had a single positive among all of CBF's 200 plus staff, so that's great, fingers crossed. We're operating on all cylinders since we went on what sort of home detention back in March for 99% of the staff. We are, however, a very collegial and family-based staff. And I gotta tell you, my principal office is at CBF's headquarters, this building, the Merrill Environmental Center in Annapolis. I'm on the road a lot to the other offices, but we all miss being together. And it's certainly a cliche to call an organizational staff a family, but for CBF, it really is. So we miss it a lot. This is our headquarters. It was called the greenest building in the world when we built it over 20 years ago. And then we built the Brock Environmental Center down at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia Beach. And this is now called the greenest building in the world. So we miss being in these offices. We also have rental offices in Richmond, Washington, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and a small office over on Maryland's Eastern Shore in Easton. So let me talk a little bit about the Clean Water Blueprint. But first I want to review what CBF has achieved, the highlights of our work over the past 3 or 4 months. First, our IT staff has done an absolutely extraordinary job connecting us. It's only second to being together in person, but we're on video conferences daily. The connectivity is above my pay grade, let's put it that way. Our educators, usually out in the field, on boats, in the marsh, they've teamed up with our communication staff to bring the Chesapeake Bay, the outdoors, into people's homes. We've worked extensively with our network of teachers to help them provide content to their students and to help parents provide content to their students, their children, and adults as well. Our science and policy experts, our advocates have been advocating. We've been lobbying in the broadest sense of the word, as we do in the executive branch, the legislative branch, the federal, the state, local governments where appropriate. I think we even in May, we did congressional testimony remotely and online. Our restoration staff have been coming back more quickly because they're generally outside than the rest of us. But right on through, we've been working with homeowners, with farmers, planting trees, forested buffers, working on our 10 million tree goal for Pennsylvania, and of course, planting oysters and everything else in between. The Claggett Farm, our model farm in Upper Marlboro, Maryland, never shut down. Farming is an essential need. And one of the great things at Claggett is our 40-year partnership with the DC Community Food Bank. We grow fruits and vegetables with volunteers from the food bank that then go into Washington to help the homeless. And finally, CBF litigators. We have a public interest law firm, if you will, 5 full-time litigators on staff, helped by a paralegal. And our caseload has been undiminished. In fact, we've launched a major new case, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a second. Our trustees, they have been more active than ever before. They remind us that just as biodiversity is key to a healthy estuary, human diversity is key to a coalition-based bay-saving network. It's a 30-person board, female majority. Our chair is a Latina, Elizabeth Oliver Farrow, and our vice chair is a Black businessman from Richmond. So a terrifically strong board that is as critical to CBF as anything. So now let me talk about the Chesapeake Clean Water Blueprint. Pull up my first slide, which is the watershed. The basic element of the Clean Water Blueprint, which is so critical, is that it's science-based. And that starts with defining the Chesapeake Bay as the entire watershed. 6 states in the District of Columbia, 64,000 square miles, all the way up to Cooperstown, New York, way out west in Virginia, almost to Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. Look on this, and everything inside that white line flows. Any water that is discharged or runs off that land comes into the main stem of the Chesapeake Bay, itself 200 miles from Havre de Grace to the Virginia Capes. And look at Virginia. Virginia and the Susquehanna River supply 50%. I'm sorry, I said Virginia, I meant Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania and the Susquehanna River supply 50% of all the fresh water entering the Chesapeake Bay. Pennsylvania is critical to the bay's health and to the bay's future. So the blueprint sets, let me go back to myself. The blueprint sets pollution reduction limits for a healthy Chesapeake Bay. It sets a deadline of 2025 for all 6 states in the district to reach those pollution reduction targets. Now, some have called it a pollution diet. Bureaucrats call it a total maximum daily load, which is a Clean Water Act term. I think bureaucrats tend to like acronyms, TMDLs. But we did a little market survey, and we found that people really were attracted to the concept of a clean water blueprint. It's positive, it's moving forward. It implies that there's a plan, and that's exactly what it is. It all began when CBF sued the federal government for failure to enforce the Clean Water Act. It was 2007, the end of the Bush administration. And when President Obama was elected, we began to negotiate with his Environmental Protection Agency. Lisa Jackson was the confirmed by the Senate, new administrator of EPA. She happens to be one of my personal environmental heroes. I remember when Keith Campbell, our chairman of the board, and I went in to see her. It was about 2 weeks after confirmation. And we walked in, she was smiling, but she said, "Gentlemen, I always enjoy meeting people who are suing me. But that smile on her face made us realize that we were probably going to do okay. She was probably going to be open to negotiations. And in fact, she was. It took about 9-12 months of negotiations, but it ended up in a negotiated settlement. And the crux of that negotiated settlement was an executive order from the president setting up the Clean Water Blueprint. As I said, there is nothing like this in the world because a couple of reasons. I said science-based limits. I set a firm deadline. I said each state has a pro rata share of the total amount of pollution to be reduced. They've agreed on those pro rata shares. They've agreed on the deadlines. EPA has agreed to be the referee, the policeman, if you will, that enforces and holds the states accountable to meet their reductions in a timely manner. And there's something very critical to that part of it that really makes the blueprint unique. Each state has agreed and has been practicing the following. They set up 2-year incremental steps every 2 years toward progress to the 2025 goal. So every 2 years, each state produces a 2-year plan. It's very transparent. It has to be monitored. And at the end of the 2-year cycle, it's reported upon. That gives organizations like us, it gives EPA and others the opportunity to see how the Bay is doing cumulatively among all of the states and how each individual state is doing. And one more element that we used to say repeatedly, the blueprint is enforceable. It's enforceable. It has the power of the Federal Clean Water Act behind it. So let me tell you how it's working. And I've got a lot of good news and some bad news. And some bad news that will lead to our strategy moving forward. First, the blueprint has been working. The Bay is getting better. There's a long way left to go, but look where we've come from. Let me go to a slide that shows you, hang on.
Well, if you go to the bottom.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is a technologically challenged president you're listening to.
He's doing.
Thank you, Alice. This is a headline from my hometown newspaper, the Baltimore Sun, in 1982. It was the first time there had been scientific agreement across the board that the term "the Bay is dying" was accurate. It was a game changer. It wasn't something we liked to read, but we saw value in it because it set the standard of the day and set the requirement that things were in a very bad way and needed improvement. Let's fast forward 36 years to 2018, the same paper. I'll let you read that headline. As important as it was for science to have consensus that the Bay was dying, it was equally important and equally impressive that science came together to say the Bay's been improving long enough and significantly enough for them to declare that there was systemic improvement. Further down in this article, I don't have it on the screen, but one very prominent University of Maryland scientist said, from China to Peru, the Chesapeake Bay is viewed as a model for environmental restoration. Pinch me, pinch me. That's exciting to say the least. So what are the metrics of a significantly improving bay? I'm gonna focus on two, underwater grasses and oysters. I could use a lot of others, but those are two that I think are critical. And I remember 1987, I was on a panel that Walter Cronkite monitored and was head of, and the panel came up with the conclusion at that point, back in 87, when things were pretty grim, that if oysters and grasses showed real improvement, that would be as good a sign of an improving bay as anything. Look at this picture. Those are underwater grass beds on the Susquehanna Flats of the Chesapeake Bay, photograph taken 2 years ago. You could not have found a place on the Chesapeake that looked like that 10 years ago, even 8 or 9, even 7 or 8 years ago. Grasses need clean water to grow. And there's a positive feedback loop with underwater grasses. They reoxygenate the water, they filter the water, they clarify the water, so they help the water become more clean. And as the water becomes more clean, that perpetuates an advancing of more grasses, because sunlight can penetrate the water and nurture photosynthesis to grow more grasses. So grasses are a tremendous water quality indicator. And they have a symbiotic relationship with oysters as well, because oysters also filter the water, help provide clarity, and help to improve water quality. Oysters have been called the coral reefs of the Chesapeake Bay, of an estuary. And while underwater grasses come back when water quality does, oysters have been so depleted that they need proactive restoration to begin to return to the Chesapeake Bay. And that's what we're seeing now. And I'm going to brag a little bit on CBF. This is a one-of-a-kind vessel. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation has been operating for 15 years. And the banner on the vessel, the Chesapeake Oyster Alliance, is 60 or so organizations that have come together under the leadership of CBF with the audacious goal of trying to achieve 10 billion new oysters in the bay by 2025. No small plans for these guys. There are a lot of others working on it. This is not the only group. These are not the only groups working on oyster restoration. We have the Oyster Recovery Partnership. We have a number of federal agencies, the Army Corps of Engineers, but this is one that CBF has been, has nurtured, has founded, and we're very proud of. That's the Patricia Campbell, the vessel you were just seeing. It was built by Keith Campbell, even before he was a CBF trustee. He's been dedicated to oyster restoration for many, many years, and he built this one-of-a-kind vessel for CBF and ultimately came on our board and ultimately became chair. And just this week, the Patricia Campbell was the instrument for planting 2.3 million oysters in the Tread Avon River. They're little baby spat, they're called spat. They're attached to old oyster shells. You can see them piled there on the vessel, and they're spread across the oyster bar that you're trying to restore. Now this is Maryland. Let me show you what we're doing in Virginia. These two barges, they're joined together, are called the Louis and the Prue, after Louis and Prue Ryan joined together in holy matrimony for, I think, close to 50 years now. But they can be separated and do good work alone, or come together and do doubly good work as a single unit. We call them a mobile oyster center. I love the graphics. CBF staff did all of these graphics. Look at the back of the wheelhouse. Baby oysters on board. You gotta promote your product. And then finally, an aerial shot of the christening. Pam Northam, the First Lady of Virginia, did the christening, and we had a great crowd on hand for it back last fall. So those are two elements of CBF's work, all towards trying to get more oysters in Chesapeake Bay, promote more underwater grasses. And as I said, I mean, I could have talked about other metric, the dead zone, low dissolved oxygen. Dead zone is going down, blue crabs are going up. That would have been an absolutely scientific, valid set of metrics. Or pollution writ large, going down, osprey, eagles going up. It's a bay that's getting better. We like to tell the story of improvement, but we always add, we have a long, long way left to go. It is still a system out of balance. There's a lot of work left to go before we can say we have a saved bay. So with that, let me segue to some of the bad news. And this may sound political, it's not. It's pure fact, and it is what we and others have been dealing with. The Trump administration, in its first budget handed to Congress following the Obama administration, took the Chesapeake Bay program. This is the partnership between all the states and the federal agencies that has been in place for 30 years and has been accelerated by the blueprint. Took that partnership funding, $72 million, and gave a budget to Congress with zero funding for the Bay program. Bipartisan support in Congress, it was restored to $72 million. The next year, the president's budget took the $72 million that had been restored, reduced it, this time by only 90%, down to $7 million. It was restored, bipartisan support. The next year, $72 million down to $7 million. And what did Congress do? They took it back to $72 million and kept on going, added another $17 million to the Bay program funding. I say this because we are up against an administration that is not supportive of the Bay restoration work. I'll give you an example that's not financial. Last winter, one of the key staff on the Bay program for EPA, the lead federal agency, presented at a large gathering of Bay program gathering. And he said, the deadline, the reductions, the metrics, the goals, they're aspirational only. There's no force of law. They're aspirational. There's no enforceability. It's just our hope. That goes against everything that was important, was critical, was necessary, and was accepted across the board by all the states and all the federal agencies and the president that came before that administration. The reason it's so critical to say that to practice enforceability, to practice accountability for EPA, it's the only jurisdiction of government, if you remember that chart of all the Bay states, the only jurisdiction of government that can look at the Bay as a single entity is a federal jurisdiction, and EPA, as I say, has taken on that role. So EPA needs to hold the states accountable. All the states have a good deal of work left to do, but unfortunately, look at these metrics for the state of Pennsylvania. So this is a bar chart for nitrogen, one of the central pollutants, systemic pollutants of the Bay. And it describes the 2025 reduction goal that, as I say, everyone has agreed to. The current shortfall is 53 million pounds a year. That's 70% of the total. We've got a long way to go, if I didn't say that before. But Pennsylvania's share of the reduction is 70%. Now, there's some good news in these data. Pennsylvania's share, 80% of which will come from agricultural improvements. Agricultural improvements that are helpful for degraded water quality in Pennsylvania, and of course the Bay downstream, are helpful for agriculture because they're all about keeping soil on the land. Soil is the transport mechanism for pollutants. And agricultural best management practices are the least expensive way, by far, to get a pound of nitrogen out of the system. EPA has refused to hold Pennsylvania accountable. But more than that, it's refused to help Pennsylvania solve its gap. Our current chairman, 18 months ago, Harry Lester, and I went to see Andrew Wheeler, the administrator, to see if we could find out why there was reluctance and if we could encourage them to do something more. We thought that EPA could be instrumental in bringing federal agencies, and especially the United States Department of Agriculture, to the table with funding to help Pennsylvania farmers who desperately want to do this work. They're lined up in waiting lists for cost share monies to do best management practices. The Pennsylvania legislature is a lost cause. They basically don't even fund books for school kids. You drive into Pennsylvania on the roads, you'll see there's not a lot of interest in infrastructure improvements in Pennsylvania. So we had hoped that EPA would help Pennsylvania and maybe be a catalyst to encourage the legislature to start appropriating some of their own money to help the farmers do what they want to do. Andrew Wheeler said basically no. He said, no, I'm not worried about it. Everything will be fine. 2025 will come. Will this be fine? We hoped to avoid litigation. We cannot. We gave them a year. Others put pressure on them. Nothing has happened. And in fact, as I said, Dana Ongst came forward and said, no, it's not enforceable. We're not going to do anything. So 3 weeks ago, we filed a notice of intent to sue EPA in federal court. This is a requirement of the Clean Water Act to give at least 60-day notice to EPA if you're going to institute litigation in federal court. What was so remarkable was that four attorneys generals, Delaware, Maryland, DC, and Virginia, all filed notices of intent to sue in parallel with CBF on the same day and participated in the same press conference. And we're very, very pleased to have the Maryland Watermen's Association as a co-litigant with us. So we're going back to court. We think we have great case law on our side. We would be more than happy to negotiate a settlement. We'll probably bring the litigation in the fall, and we'll see what happens. We're determined to keep the pressure on, to keep this one-of-a-kind effort to save Chesapeake Bay alive. Now, before I turn it back to Alice and have some Q&A, and I hope some advice, we need all the advice we can get, and I actually love constructive criticism, so I don't know, I'm not so sure I love it, but I accept constructive criticism.
This
so
is a great time
to
remind everyone we're re-recording this presentation well.
Alice says we're recording it. So before we get started on the Q&A, let me just touch on one thing that I know is going to be brought up if I don't, and that's climate change. Like the coronavirus, we believe at CBF that climate change is an existential threat to our little planet. Think just about the change in disease vectors and the impact on human health, but so much more. Most fundamentally, warm water holds less oxygen, and that's a critical issue for the Bay. So every aspect of climate change is going to make Bay saving more difficult. We produced, pull up my next slide, a special issue of our magazine this spring.
Will, I think you need to go down and hit the little button to share. There you go. Almost. Yep. Thank you.
Good thing I got you right on my side, Alice. Thank you. So our spring issue of the magazine we worked on all winter was to explore and describe the nexus between climate change and the Chesapeake Bay. And what we talk about is that every aspect of climate change will make saving the bay more difficult. And of course, with climate change, there's no vaccine. It's going to be a long-term challenge for all of us. But I'm a glass half full person. And so I look at things a little differently sometimes. Here's my take on climate change in the bay. A healthy Chesapeake Bay, a healthy estuary, is the best first line of defense for coastal areas combating the impacts of climate change. A healthy bay will help to mitigate the adverse impacts of climate change, not erase them, but will help to mitigate them. And so there's one more fundamental reason that saving the bay is so critical. Lastly, another reason, another demonstration of the fact I'm a glass half full person. Two final slides that I think represent the future. This little guy is Graham Mitchell. He lives in Hampton Roads, Virginia. He is an absolute oyster fanatic. I did a podcast with him. I was entranced by how much he knows about oysters. This was 2 years ago with one of our staff. He's still as excited and as involved with oyster restoration as ever, and I think that's going to last. And another this case, a young woman, Tamiya Johnson, who is absolutely keen and focused on picking up trash in her neighborhood and here at a local park on CBF's Clean the Bay Day with her grandmother. Those two young folks give me optimism for the future. I hope they give you optimism as well. So let's save the bay. We can get this done. We can make it the greatest environmental success story the world has ever seen. We're determined. We're going to stick around till we get it done. All right, Alice, back to you. Give me the toughest questions you got.
Oh, we are lining them up. Thank you, Will. As another piece of housework, if you would like to ask a question, you're welcome to ask it in the Q&A function or in the chat, and I will relay them to Will. We have a question from Sue Massel. She's on the Eastern Shore. Her question is, here on the Eastern Shore, we're most concerned about the impact of poultry, both in terms of manure runoff and nitrogen disposition from ammonia. How can we ramp up the poultry litter transport program, and how can we begin to get ammonia on the radar?
Boy, you really hit an extremely important one. And as you said, you're most focused on this on the Eastern Shore. There's some hotbeds for poultry, Eastern Shore, Maryland, Virginia, the Shenandoah, a lot of turkeys in Virginia and the Shenandoah. So there are absolutely ways that the poultry industry has started to reduce the impact, but has a long, long way to go. I have to say that there's no question that they are an economic engine for the Eastern Shore, but to me, that doesn't absolve them of the responsibility to be environmentally as good as they can be. So you mentioned the poultry manure transport initiative. That's taking manure from where there is great excesses to areas that can use it as a asset, a wonderful soil supplement for farmers to use. So transport is expensive, but if we have to pay a little more for a pound of chicken, I think the consumer will do that. You look at these sales on chicken. When I was growing up, chicken was somewhat of a specialty. Not quite a luxury, but not far from it. A pound of chicken costs almost nothing today. You can buy a whole cooked broiler, and I think people are willing to pay a little bit more. We need to keep the political pressure on. And you mentioned ammonia. Discharges of ammonia to the atmosphere, into the air, come back as nitrogen deposition into the water. So that's just as critical as well. Thanks for your question.
Thank you, Sue. She was our first question. It's always Always brave to be that person. Their next question is from David Kyle. David is asking, besides financial contributions, how can the public help the Chesapeake Bay Foundation achieve its 2025 goals?
David's a friend. David, is there anything else besides financial contributions? I'm tongue in cheek. No, look, I would literally say this is of higher importance. Political communications to your elected officials, from local government to state government. I know you live in the district. I'm sorry, we're for statehood as well. From local government to state government to the federal government. We are a democracy, and I know we get a little upset with the impact of big money lobbyists, but grassroots lobbying, letting your elected officials know how important saving the Chesapeake Bay is. You can go on our website, you can sign up for action alerts on our website. We'll flood your inboxes with specific requests for policy needs at all the different levels of government and the different legislators who need to be contacted. So political activism is critical. And I know that we're not the only issue. We realize that, but we at least hope we're going to be on your radar screen for communications to your elected officials. And it will make a difference. I promise you that. And do go to our website, do sign up to get action alerts, because those really are the way we communicate with our members to give them the tools and the issues that are the hot button issues at any particular time. Thanks, David.
Great. Thanks, David. Our next question is from Maynard Davis. Maynard is asking a question that's more related to current events. Maynard has asked, have the effects of the pandemic lockdown reduced economic activity shown up in the Bay?
You know, I haven't seen much monitoring on the Bay different from broader and really larger climate monitoring. In the very beginning, you know, we saw all those worldwide pictures of people in New Delhi seeing the mountains, the Alps for the first, the Himalayas for the first time, and issues of wildlife coming back into the cities. Clearly, there has to be some impact, and hopefully monitoring will pick that up. Often the kind of monitoring we have on the Chesapeake takes a year to really start to be captured, synthesized, and reported on. So we'll see. We're not holding out a lot of hope that that's going to be a game changer, but if it shows what is possible, if people change their practices, then I think it will be an important tool for all environmentalists to use to demonstrate that we can, in fact, make a difference if we change our practices.
And our next question is from someone you know well, John Rodenhausen. He's asking about CBF and Maryland's lawsuit against the EPA. Secondary question is, will the petroleum burning power plants in the Ohio River Valley be resuming use of their scrubbers anytime soon?
John is a staff member at CBF. Thank you, John. He's referring to, as I said, we've got a lot of litigation going on. This lawsuit that John is referring to, we are also in collaboration with the state of Maryland, and these lawsuits are being brought by other states who are suffering the same consequences. What are those consequences? The fact that air pollution coming from one state is impacting another state's air quality, and sometimes throwing the downwind states out of compliance. What we're seeing from the Midwest, from big coal and fossil fuel burning power plants, is a plume of air pollution coming across the country and affecting mid-Atlantic air quality. That's bad for human health. Anytime you burn a fossil fuel, nitrogen oxide goes into the air and it comes back down as nitrogen deposition. So air emissions, whether from mobile sources, stationary sources, anytime you burn fossil fuels, air emissions are responsible for up to 30% of the nitrogen entering the Chesapeake Bay. So we are involved with litigation. It's ongoing. It has not been resolved. But we have been doing, not only with that case, but with other cases, more litigation and more policy advocacy on air issues than we had in the past, because of the very, very well documented correlation between air pollution and water quality. And of course, the human health impacts are obvious.
Right. I actually have a question about our programming that I think would be important, that hits a lot of the priorities that we identified to meet 2025, and that's our Making History campaign. Can you go into a little bit of detail? We talked a little about oysters. If we could talk about that campaign and how it fits in achieving our blueprint goals.
Thank you, Allison. You had me under such constraints to be a certain time limit. There's so much I could have said that I didn't, but let me hit this one quickly because it's important. As any not-for-profit organization, we engage in campaigns from time to time. You see big universities doing campaigns, or hospitals for building new buildings and things like that. The campaign we're now well into is a campaign to do 3 critical things, all of which will advance the blueprint. I've mentioned 2 of them in my remarks in passing, not as part of a campaign which we call the Making History campaign. It's to try to bring together a coalition of volunteer organizations and people in Pennsylvania to plant 10 million trees in the right locations to reduce runoff and help Pennsylvania meet that gap we showed on the chart by 2025. 10 million new trees. Also has tremendous, obviously, value for mitigating climate change. Second, I mentioned it in passing, 10 billion oysters added to Chesapeake Bay by 2025. Oysters filter the water. They're key part of the ecosystem, critical elements of an estuary. And there too, dozens and dozens of partner organizations working together and with us. And the third leg of the stool is a goal of achieving 1 million new advocates, 1 million new voices to do just what David Kyle asked about. What else can we do besides give money to raise their voices on behalf of saving the Chesapeake Bay? So those are the 3 legs of the stool: 10 million trees, 10 billion oysters, and 1 million new voices. We're well on the way, got great coalitions, and we've raised a lot of money to further it.
I went on unmute for a second and I'm back. I have a question from Randy Dove. CBF has always had an extensive education program for teachers and students. In light of the changes we are seeing in how people may go to school in the future, what is CBF doing to adjust to the new realities? That's a great question, Randy. Thank you for asking.
Randy, good to hear from you. It's been a while. I wish you'd given me advice as opposed to a question. Now, we are part of a broad group of teachers, outdoor educators. Our staff of environmental educators, outdoor educators at CBF is I think it's probably the largest single department in terms of staffing at CBF. We have 15 different outdoor environmental education centers. We take about 30,000 students and teachers a year, and school principals. Teachers and principals come to us in the summer in a normal year and spend 5 days in immersion going all over the Bay. And then of course they bring their students back in the fall and spring. We run up until about December in the fall, and we start in March in the spring. It's the largest outdoor environmental education program in the country. But schools are not in play right now. Students are at home. So as I mentioned briefly, we are taking, we've worked with others, we've done our own, we're developing curriculum packages for teachers and parents to use in the home. We have over 200 teachers who will be participating in online courses all summer. So while not in the field, there is still teacher training going on this summer. We don't know yet what next fall will bring. We don't know if students will be back in school, and if they are, will they be allowed to come on field trips? I think they're probably going to be safer outdoors on a field trip than in the classroom, but of course that still may not be allowed. So if they are in school, but not coming on field trips, we've been working with the teachers to make sure our educators will be fully available to come to the schools and maybe do some outdoor work on the field, on the schoolyard, or maybe a local open space, green space, if not a park near a school. That might be more palatable to the schools. And if worse comes to worst, we'll be in the classroom, bringing the outdoors inside as much as we can. But we're hopeful, and if there are no students in the schools at all, we'll continue what we've done for the last 2 or 3 months, which is try to bring the outdoors into the home through virtual learning.
Great question. I have another question from Charles Wilkers. He actually goes by Chuck. He's in Warrenton, Virginia. And he writes, if I were to share something on my Facebook page in support of your efforts, what would it be? What would be the #1 thing we would want people to share with their networks right now? I'm taking notes myself, Will, but I promise not to get on Facebook until we're done.
Well, I'm tempted to say, join the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, because then that leads to, so much more opportunities for us to engage the people that, are on your Facebook, Chuck. But, we have a very well-populated Facebook page ourselves, so you can go to that. And I'm an old guy, I don't know all the right terms, but like retweeting, reposting the stuff that's on our Facebook page, on your Facebook page. And if you wanted, one call to action, I think it would be, well, people say it's not going to do any good, but to let this administration know that saving the Bay, with Washington at the very center of the watershed, what a magnificent opportunity for this administration to show its environmental bona fides. There's so much to build on that's already happened. So those are some ideas. But check out our Facebook page and see what ideas you see there, and our website as well, of course.
I have a question for you, Will, and this is I'm gonna have to ask you to put your fortune teller hat on for this one. So the Chesapeake Clean Water Blueprint is a 15-year plan, started in 2010. The deadline is 2025. It's 2025. What if we don't meet the deadline? What if the goals are not met?
Hey, Alice, get on the program here. we are not contemplating not meeting the deadline. No, but I appreciate the question. Look, you saw that chart for nitrogen. We've achieved only 30% of the 15-year goal. Certainly, things get started slowly. You tend to have a ramping up towards the end of a process that is effective. So I'm not completely depressed by that only 30% thus far. But again, being the glass half full person I am, when you see the kind of improvements already in place on the Bay, from not getting to where the scientists say we need to be, I'll bite on the question and say, even if the deadline isn't met, which I'm not, our litigators and all the advocates on staff are going to howl if they even hear me say that's a possibility. But if it were, I think we would still see a Bay that was better. I know we would see a Bay that was better for trying than for having not tried at all. But banish the thought, we're going to hit that goal. We as a region, as a series of states and federal agencies, are going to achieve the deadline.
And I will tell you, I know that litigation team, and I want them on my side for just about everything. So I know better than to pick a fight with them, but to be on their side. So good point. Speaking of litigation, so we filed a notice of intent to sue earlier in mid-May. And what are the exact next steps? Have we filed to sue, or are we still in the notice of intent phase?
Right. And make sure we're getting to all the questions others are asking too, Alice. But these are the sort of things people might be asking. So you have 60 days after you file the notice of intent to sue. Summer is a tough time. I doubt the 60 days will be expiring towards the end of July. My guess is we and the other states' attorneys generals are probably not going to file that suit in August. It'll probably be in September. But we're still waiting to see if there's any response from EPA to our letter.
I have one more question from Maynard Davis, and we are going to be wrapping up. We still have time for a few more questions. Please feel to ask them in the chat or in the Q&A box. Maynard Davis asks, are there international collaborators in estuary restoration that CBF works with around the world?
First, there are absolutely international collaborators. One of the areas that has received a lot of attention is the Black Sea. The Black Sea has had all the same issues as the Chesapeake. And one of our scientist trustees, Dr. Don Bosch, is just one of the Bay advocates, one of the Bay scientists who's been heavily involved in that. But we've had visitors from all over the world, and some of our staff have gone to symposia all over the world. So there is a network, but not something like the types of networks we have here on the Chesapeake of different organizations like the Choose Clean Water Network of that we're part of, Choose Clean Water Coalition that we're part of, and others of the same ilk. Restore America's Estuaries is one that we were a founding member of 20 years ago, and it's organizations like CBF from the Northeast to the Southeast to Galveston Bay on the Gulf Coast to the West Coast that have all banded together and work as a coalition, Restore America's Estuaries. But there's nothing that I know of quite like that internationally.
Thank you, Will. I think that will wrap up all of our questions today. Did you have any closing comments for us, Will, today?
No, I just really appreciate everybody jumping on. I hope people are safe and well. I hope you will be active and maintain your determination to save Chesapeake Bay. This is really a citizen-based movement. There's no question about it. When CBF got started, I'll tell a very brief story. And I was not there 52 years ago when we got started, but I worked for the founder. The Bay Foundation got started because a group of business folks heard a Republican congressman speak, and the Republican congressman said, you cannot expect the federal government or government in total to solve all of your problems. You need to shoulder some of the burden. You need to take some of the responsibility. So they formed an organization to do just that. And so from teaching kids to restoring habitat to advocating to litigating, that's what CBF's all about. So thank you all.
Thank you all for joining us today. And thank you for supporting the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And this concludes our webinar. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.